Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
2001 had a profound impact on my life. It's all about HAL 9000.
2001 was an extraordinary breakthrough for the genre.
Science fiction has always been about great technology going wrong.
I'll be back.
That image, Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, it's a perfect nightmare.
You have two of the most popular AI characters in pop culture.
At the time, I said, don't be afraid of the robots. The robots are our friends.
The conception of what robots will be is directly, umbilically connected to our idea of them as an underclass.
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard.
Blade Runner was so artistic.
If you're creating an AI, one of the things you're definitely going to leave out is emotion.
Battlestar Galactica is about humanity's greatest weakness.
You're just a bunch of machines after all.
The inability to see others as worthy as ourselves.
Our machines have been the stuff of dreams and of nightmares. The question is, can man and machine forge a future together?
Hello, I'm here.
Oh. Hi.
They call it science fiction, but it's really about technology. It's about machines. You've done a lot of science fiction movies. You've seen all kinds of different machines, intelligent machines. You've played an intelligent machine.
I think that what's interesting is when you have been involved in the business as long as I have, what is so unbelievable is that as I have done Terminator movies, one after the next, and you see something starting out kind of what is called science fiction. And then all of a sudden it becomes kind of science reality.
Yeah, I think science fiction has always been about great technology going wrong. It's like how AI might be a threat to humanity.
I'm a friend of Sarah Connor.
Can't see her. She's making a statement.
I'll be back.
That image, Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, Skynet sending this emissary, quasi-human, into our midst, it's a perfect nightmare of the machine catastrophe. The old warning about the machines rising up. It's very archetypal and very brutal and very perfect.
When I first thought of the idea for the Terminator,
How did you come up with that idea?
it came from a dream. I had a dream image of a chrome skeleton walking out of a fire. And I thought, what if he was a cyborg and he looked like a man and was indistinguishable from a man until the fire?
And what would be the purpose of that thing?
He was representing a much more powerful intelligence, the soldier sent by Skynet from the future.
Terminator presents this vision of a future where Skynet, this computer that has become self-aware, decides, well, I'm gonna protect myself, and the only way to do that is to destroy the very people who created me, which is us.
Skynet is not the first all-powerful computer. This trope goes back to Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, to Colossus, the Forbin Project, and even up to War Games, The Whopper.
But part of what makes the Terminator so scary is that it is relentless, and it will not stop until it achieves its objective.
I remember the first day's dailies. There was a 100mm lens shot where you just kind of pull up and you're looking like this.
Right.
And we were all just going, yes, this is fantastic.
But here's the interesting thing about it. I went to talk to you about Reese.
Yeah.
This is the hero, and I wanted to continue on playing heroes.
Yeah.
And so we started talking a little bit about the movie, and for some reason or the other, not at all planned on my part, I said, look, Jim, I said, the guy that plays the Terminator, he really has to understand that he's a machine.
Exactly.
How important it is that whoever plays the Terminator has to show absolutely nothing. And the way he scans, and the way the Terminator walks has to be machine-like. And there has to be not one single frame where he has human behavior.
In the middle of this, I'm looking at you thinking, you know, guy's kind of big, like a bulldozer. Nothing could stop him. It'd be fantastic.
Exactly, yeah. And so afterwards, you said, so why don't you play the Terminator?
Yeah.
And I looked at this and said, oh,
In the first film, the Terminator is designed to kill. In Terminator 2, the Terminator was programmed to protect, not destroy.
Action! So now we're gonna make Terminator 2. Hardest part of that movie, though, was convincing you that playing the good guy was a good idea.
It threw me off first when I read the script and I realized that I'm not anymore that kind of killing machine.
I thought that if we could distill him down to this idea of just relentlessness and take out the evil and put good in its place. It's interesting that the same character worked as a bad guy and as a good guy. Same
Absolutely.
character. And now we've got to have a bigger, badder Terminator that can kick Terminator's ass. So what was that?
I was convinced I was the baddest mother walking on the planet, and you were gonna believe it. I got a call from my agent saying they were looking for an intense presence. I'm a hell of a lot smaller than Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I knew that you were just gonna have to buy that this thing was unstoppable. And then I started thinking of Pursuit, and what does that look like? And then physically, I just started taking on the mannerisms of, you know, what does an eagle look like? He's fierce and he looks like he's coming at you. And you start realizing, boom, right at you. It's like a Buick.
Get down.
You know, it's like a, whew. A moment where we actually clinch for the first time. Arnold wanted to kind of pick me up over his head and slam me into the walls and throw me around a little bit.
So it's like this is the first time you've had to deal with evil. Because Terminators don't fight Terminators. Right.
And I remember Jim specifically saying, you can't do that. He's stronger than you are. He's more powerful, he's faster. He can just dominate the T-800, who is an endoskeleton with, you know, fake skin over him, whereas I'm just a mimetic polyalloy liquid metal, much more dense. A superior machine.
The T-1000 is the robot's concept of a robot. And it's like, if a robot was trying to create a better version of itself, what would it do? And it's like, well, it would create something that's smooth and can move freely and still indestructible. You can read Terminator 2 almost as a war between old special effects and new special effects. And that's the beautiful kind of irony about the Terminator movies. They use cutting-edge technology more effectively than any of other movies, but they're about warnings about technology.
We're not gonna make it, are we? People, I mean.
It's in your nature to destroy yourselves.
The plot of the Terminator films are that we're always fighting against this robot from the future, but really what we're doing is we're fighting the humans who keep making this robot possible. As long as humans are aware that we have the potential to create a machine that can control the Earth and make us powerful, we're gonna keep doing it, and we're fighting our own nature to create this Skynet, and humans won't stop doing it. We are really the persistent villain that keeps making these movies happen.
I don't think we could have anticipated where we are now, 30-some years later, where Skynet is the term that everyone uses when they're talking about an artificial intelligence that turns against us. Part of it, I think, is there's a feeling you get before it rains and you know it's gonna rain. And you get that feeling about certain moments in technological development where you know something is going to happen very soon. And I think there's a general consensus now that we're in that moment before it rains. Now, maybe that moment takes 10 years, maybe it takes 20 years, but there's going to be a moment, and it may not have a happy ending.
And there's no rehearsal.
That's right. There's no take two.
No, this is it.
Yeah.
Hal, you have an enormous responsibility on this mission.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information.
2001 had a profound impact on my life and my daily life. It was the first time I went to a movie where I really felt like I was having a religious experience.
I watched the film 18 times in its first couple of years of release, all in theaters. I remember at one, a guy ran down the aisle toward the screen screaming, "It's God, it's God." And he meant it in that moment.
Then I had a guy in my theater who actually walked up to the screen with his arms out, and he walked through the screen.
That must have blown people's minds.
People were blown out because the person disappeared into the screen during Stargate. Of all time.
Yeah, everybody thinks of it as a space trauma, but at its core, it's really about an artificial intelligence.
It's all about HAL 9000. It's HAL 9000.
Yeah.
I got my chance to work with Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke on 2001: A Space Odyssey at a very young age. I was 23 years old. When we created HAL, we didn't have any computers. There were no personal computers available to us. There were giant mainframe computers, but it was with punch cards and chads and all kind of stuff that was not very visual. And I had to kind of develop a style that I thought was credible.
He sparked people's imagination with this film, and then they made it happen.
Hello, Frank.
Happy birthday, darling.
Happy birthday.
Individual TVs in the back of your airplane seat. The iPad. The iPod is called the iPod because of...
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
2001 was an extraordinary breakthrough for the genre.
Picture is being done in such a gigantic scope. The centrifuge is so realistic and so unusual. After a while, you begin to forget that you're an actor and you begin to really feel like an astronaut.
Working with Stanley Kubrick blew my mind. You just were aware that you were in the presence of genius.
I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before.
Hal, in a sense, is the machine that controls the whole ship, but he's another crew member from our point of view. We don't think in terms of, oh, I'm dealing with a computer here.
That's a very nice rendering, Dave.
Maybe because of that human voice. I mean, Hal has a perfectly normal inflection when he speaks to us.
I've wondered whether you might be having some second thoughts about the mission.
How do you mean?
What does it mean to have a robot who's basically running the ship that supports your life? That's a lot of trust to place in a machine.
The key point in the film occurs when Bowman says,
Well, as far as I know, no 9,000 computers have been disconnected.
Well, no 9,000 computers ever fouled up before.
Well, I'm not so sure. What do you think about it?
and HAL 9000 is reading their lips. At that point, we recognize HAL 9000 has some imperative that it must survive.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
And at that point, it's no longer a machine, it is a being.
The danger artificial intelligence poses is the power to unleash results that we hadn't anticipated.
HAL 9000 does what we see the apes in the beginning of the movie do. He commits murder.
We like to stereotype robots as entities of pure logic, but of course in 2001, it all goes horribly wrong and we have to kill the robot.
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
Yeah, Hal's death scene is such a wonderfully perverse moment because it is unbearably poignant watching him disintegrate and regress.
Bell Laboratories was experimenting with voice synthesis around the time of 2001. One of the very earliest voice synthesis experiments was Daisy Daisy, performed by an IBM computer. And because Arthur Clarke is kind of a super geek, he wanted to actually use that, and he encouraged Kubrick to use that very thing because it lent a kind of historical credibility to the whole thing that Hal, in the process of being killed or lobotomized or dying, would regress to his birth.
You know, it's really hard to make a technology. It's really hard to design AI. So much thinking, so many brilliant minds have to go into it. But even harder than creating artificial intelligence is learning how to contain it, learning how to shut it off.
I mean, HAL will exist in probably in our lifetimes, I would think.
No, I think so too. It's scary. Elon Musk continues to predict that World War III will not be a nuclear holocaust, it will be a kind of mechanized takeover.
Yeah, and Stephen Hawking's been saying similar things.
That's pretty spooky, because that pretty much says that against our will, something smarter than us, who can beat us at chess, will use this world as a chessboard and will checkmate us completely out of existence.
Unfortunately, most depictions of robots in science fiction have been really negative, very much depictions of rampaging robots engaged in a desperate struggle with humans to decide who shall own the fate of the Earth and the universe. And that's part of a very long tradition in science fiction.
Fritz Lang's Metropolis was one of the first, if not the first, big science fiction epic film. It's the story of this very futuristic world. There's one of the great bad robots of all movies, Maria. That is the movie robot.
Pulp magazines always had a full-color cover. Very often the cover would be robots that had just run amok from human creators. They were always mechanical. They were big, hulking things. Lots of steel and machinery, glowing red eyes, claws, not fingers, and they were generally quite violent. So that image persisted a long time. But then along came Isaac Asimov.
If we could have roughly man-like robots who could take over the dull and routine tasks, that this would be a very nice combination.
Asimov was very central to helping make science fiction what it is today. He was at the 1939 World's Fair in New York City. It must have felt like a very science fictional experience to him, and not in least part because he would have seen Electro, the smoking robot.
Okay, Toots.
And this really inspired Asimov, and so he decided to start writing stories where he would explore robots as tools and helpers and friends of humanity rather than enemies.
He invented these images and these ideas that I think defined how people in the field thought about robots. Specifically, those 3 laws of his, of course, are really important.
What are the 3 laws of robotics? First law is a robot may not harm a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger.
Number 2, a robot must obey orders given it by qualified personnel.
Fire.
Unless those orders violate rule number 1. In other words, a robot can't be ordered to kill a human being.
See? He's helpless.
The 3rd law states that a robot can defend itself.
Except where that would violate the 1st and 2nd law.
I think Asimov's laws are very smart. Very, very smart. I think they're also made to be broken.
We know you'll enjoy your stay in Westworld, the ultimate resort. Lawless violence on the American frontier, peopled by lifelike robot men and women.
The movie Westworld looks at a theme park with guests coming in and doing whatever they please to the robots. It was really a forum for human id to run amok, where there is no threat of anybody knowing the things that you've done, where you don't have to engage with other humans, and you're told, do whatever you want.
Where nothing can possibly go wrong.
I'm shot.
Go wrong.
Raw.
Shut down. Shut down immediately.
6 responsive.
Westworld was a cautionary tale about robotics. It was the idea that we believed that we could create artificial life and that it would obey us.
And come here and he'll be caught there.
The original film by Michael Crichton is very cool and is packed with ideas about fraught interactions with artificial intelligence. Decades ahead of his time, the questions that he posed in the original film only became more and more relevant as we reimagined it as a TV series.
When you're looking at the story of a robot, oftentimes you see a robot that's docile, and then something goes click, and they kind of snap.
Maximilian!
What Joan and I talked about was, well, take that moment, that snap, before they go on the killing rampage? And what if we really attenuate it and explore it and dive deep into that schism? Because for us, that was where a really meaty philosophical question rested. And that question was, where did life begin?
Maeve, who's one of the robots, she's a madam who runs a brothel. She's one of the first robots to start realizing that she's a robot instead of just a person who is living in the Wild West. To me, one of the most significant scenes in the show is when Maeve starts coming into consciousness while she's being repaired.
Everything in your head, they put it there.
No one knows what I'm thinking.
I'll show you.
And she sees it's an algorithm, and it's choosing words based on probability.
It can't possibly.
The robots in Westworld begin to ask questions, which are the same questions we ask. We have a sense that there is a creator, that there is a purpose. There's a reason that we are here. Unfortunately, they discover that the reason that they are there is simply to be an entertainment.
I'd like to make some changes.
Marvin Minsky, who's one of the pioneers of AI, said that free will might be that first primitive reaction to forced compliance. So the first word of consciousness is no.
I'm not going back.
Science fiction has always, when dealing with AI, whether it's Asimov's laws or the laws that we tried to put in place in Westworld, the question is, can laws ever even fully contain a human? People will stretch those laws, find exceptions to them.
I understand now.
Not sure that an AI would be any different. When consciousness awakens, it's impossible to put the genie back in the bottle.
Let's talk about AI for a second. You only see robots in a positive role in your films, which is interesting because that's where so much of the progress is being made now with companions for the elderly, robotic nurses.
They're going to make life better for us.
Because you have two of the most popular AI characters in pop culture, which are R2-D2 and C-3PO. They're AIs.
At the time, I said, don't be afraid of the robots. You know, the robots are our friends. Let's see the good side of the robots.
Yeah.
And the funny side, because let's face it, for a while they're going to be a little goofy.
I've just about had enough of you, you nearsighted scrap pile.
George Lucas was very innovative throughout his whole career, and one of the things early on that was very smart was that he pioneered a different type of robot.
R2-D2 looks like a trash can. He doesn't even speak, right? He just makes chirping sounds. But he's lovable. Everybody loves. He's not cuddly. He's not. That's a great character.
C-3PO is probably the most charming and beloved of the robot characters ever made. And I love the fact that George didn't articulate the mouth or the eyes, and so it's a blank mask. And yet we get so much heart from Anthony Daniels' performance.
I mean, I love robots, and the idea of being able to design one for a Star Wars film was just too good to pass up.
Did you know that wasn't me? K2SO from Rogue One, I thought was just perfect.
To be fair, the biggest influence on K2SO was C-3PO. Anthony Daniels as C-3PO has a cameo in our film, and I remember going around Anthony Daniels' house to try and talk him into it, and I didn't know if he would hate the idea or if he was fed up with Star Wars. And I sat there and I was so paranoid meeting him and his wife that I just pitched the whole movie to them. And I must have chatted for like an hour. Just kept going and going. And I got to the end and I couldn't tell from his face. And he was like, Gareth, you know, I'd love to be involved. Like, you had me at hello type thing. It was just like having like this god on set, you know, like this original, this is where it all began, Star Wars character. It was like goosebumpy stuff.
Friends forever?
I think one of the reasons that people love robots and gravitate to the robot characters in movies like Star Wars is because whereas the human characters feel very fully formed, they are people, the robots are things that it feels okay to project more of ourselves onto. Huey, Dewey, and Louie from Silent Running are possibly the cutest robots. They don't talk, but you still kind of always know what they're thinking.
It's great to have a best friend. In fantasy, it might be a dragon. In science fiction, it might be a robot.
I love Johnny Five. I mean, this is a robot who quotes John Wayne of his own free will.
Take heart, little lady.
Buck Rogers was great because they didn't exactly rip off R2-D2, but they got halfway there. So they got the voice of Yosemite Sam, they got Mel Blanc, the greatest cartoon voice in the world, Captain Caveman, and they invented Tweaky, who would go bitty, 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 bitty.
You ever have two broken arms, Buster?
What?
We love friendly robots because they bring out the best of what we are as humans.
Wall-E, who's a friendly garbage collecting robot, isn't at all like a garbage robot should be. He really develops a whole personality.
Wow.
He's there to clean up the mess that humans have made. And he goes from interpreting that literally to actually saving the world for humanity.
Many, many science fiction stories turn the robot into some kind of a romantic figure that somehow becomes more human as the story goes on. There was Lester Del Rey's 1938 story, Helen O'Loy. Bad pun in the title, by the way. The name is Helen Alloy. She's made out of metal. Essentially a housekeeping robot. Falls in love with her maker. It was one of the first stories in which a robot is a sympathetic, romantic character.
If you're actually in conversations with a robot where it sounds natural and it sounds like a person, and that person knows you, laughs at your jokes, and has empathy for your struggles in life, and you develop a relationship with that voice, you could absolutely fall in love with it.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh. Hi.
Hi. It's really nice to meet you.
What do I call you? Do you have a name?
Yes, Samantha. In the movie Her, Samantha's design is that she's been created to be a tool. What's interesting about this idea of a pocket tool is that we see this in our own lives. Our smartphones have become these tools to us that we're dependent on. So Theodore's relationship with Samantha is just one step beyond that. He can't live without her because he also loves her.
When Theodore sees her pop up on his screen, it's like seeing his girlfriend.
Good night.
Right. What I had to do was create the interface. So you have like handwriting, it's my handwriting, and I wrote out Samantha. And then this paper texture, but then there's a magic to it. It floats, it kind of moves holographically, and there's shadowing, but none of it is technological. An interface where it's like possible to fall in love with your OS.
Are these feelings even real? Or are they just programming? What a sad trick.
You feel real to me, Samantha.
Part of what you see in Her definitely is a cautionary tale about being too reliant on your gadgets and your technology and being too emotionally invested in them. It's a reminder that there are people out there, you know, that final image of him with Amy Adams is so emotional, and it's only through this experience that they both went on involving this technology that they've found each other.
You know, we're going to live in a world with robots and artificial intelligence. Yeah. You might as well get used to it. You shouldn't be afraid of it. And we should be very careful not to have it be bad. But if it goes bad, it's us. Yeah. It's not them.
People always ask me, so do you think the machines will ever beat us? I say, I think it's a race. It's a race between us improving and making ourselves better, our own evolution, spiritual, psychological evolution. At the same time, we've got these machines evolving, because if we don't improve enough to direct them properly, our godlike power of using artificial intelligence and all these other robotic tools and so on will ultimately just blow back in our face and take us out.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that it takes a lot of effort to create changes in human behavior. Right. But that's what our responsibility is.
Yeah, I actually think we're evolving, we're co-evolving with our machines, we're changing.
Yes, exactly.
In January of 2002, Universal was looking for somebody to reinvent Battlestar Galactica. So I tracked down a pilot of the original Galactica, and they did in 1978. There were some interesting ideas within it.
The final annihilation of the life form known as man. Let the attack begin.
But never quite were able to figure out what the show really was. But at the same time, I was very struck by the parallels to 9/11. You know, this is just a couple of months after the 9/11 attack. And I realized immediately that if you did this series at that moment in time, it was going to have a very different emotional resonance for the audience.
Battlestar Galactica is about the last remaining scraps of humanity out there in a fleet in deep space after an attack from robots has decimated humanity.
So the idea was that human beings essentially started creating robots for all the dirty jobs that they didn't want to do anymore.
And then the machines themselves, because they revere their creators, make machines that are even more like us. Cylons that are flesh and blood, just like humans.
The Cylons saw themselves as the children of humanity and that they wouldn't be able to really grow and mature until their parents were gone. So they decide they need to wipe out their human creators in this apocalyptic attack.
I think on the surface you could say Battlestar Galactica is about be careful of what you invent. But I think the real driving force of the show is not about that. I think it's about humanity's greatest weakness, the inability to see others as worthy as ourselves.
That's the central conflict is of these two. We are people, no, you're not.
You are truly no greater than we are. You're just a bunch of machines after all.
Let the games begin.
Flesh and Bone is a torture episode. It's a very much sort of a two-person play. It raises the question, would she be less morally culpable because he's not really human?
You're not human.
Was a person being tortured in this scene and crying out and experiencing pain, or was this all an elaborate simulation? We wanted to deal with the issue of what's moral and just in a society at war like this, but at the same time, we were also examining a different idea in the show, which was about consciousness and personhood.
Who's the real monster? Is it the humans who built creatures that they knew were human equivalent, but enslaved them anyway? Or is it the slaves who rose up to destroy the type of people who would do that?
The big central idea of Battlestar Galactica is, does humanity deserve to survive? Can we earn our survival?
You know, when we fought the Cylons, we did it to save ourselves from extinction. But we never answered the question, why? Why are we as a people worth saving?
That's an amazing question.
The Cylons through the series evolved from a place of sort of blind hatred for humanity to then having more contact with individual human beings, having experiences with them, experiencing emotions with them, and then the humans realized that the Cylons are not as monolithic as they believed at the outset.
When you think you love somebody, you love them. That's what love is. Thoughts. She was a Cylon, a machine. She was more than that to us. She was more than that to me. She was a vital living person.
Battlestar Galactica gives you an idea of what could be. How do we all do this together?
If Battlestar Galactica is any guide, we can evolve together with the machines that we create. We can become one people, respectful of each other, make a future together. Yeah, I hope mankind is worthy of survival.
I've talked to some AI experts, and the one expert said, just right out, we're trying to make a person. And I said, so when you say a person, you mean a personhood? They have an ego, they have a sense of identity? He said, yes, all those things.
If you're a very smart group of human beings who are creating an AI, one of the things you're definitely going to leave out is to put in emotion.
Right.
Because if you have emotion, emotion will lead to many facets, one of them being deceit, anger, fury, hatred.
Sure.
As well as love.
If a machine becomes like us enough and complex enough, at what point can we no longer tell the difference? Yeah. Does it have freedom? Does it have free will?
This hearing is to determine the legal status of the android known as Data.
The character of Data was sort of everyone's favorite character on the show, and in the writing staff as well. Everyone loved to write Data stories. Here's a robot who wants to be human, but who has no emotions, but wants emotions. So it's really Pinocchio. And the Pinocchio metaphor is powerful.
Commander, what are you? Webster's 24th Century Dictionary, 5th edition, defines an android as an automaton made to resemble a human being.
The Measure of a Man is one of those sort of very deep episodes that you don't realize is deep until like 4 or 5 years later, and you see it and you go, oh, wow.
In the episode, Data's humanity is essentially put on trial. Is he sentient? Is he worthy of being treated as a person?
Am I a person or property? And what's at stake? My right to choose.
It was a legitimate exploration of this idea of personhood in a legal sense and in a moral sense.
Its responses dictated by an elaborate software written by a man. And now a man will shut it off.
It was shocking to the characters in the show and shocking to the audience as well, because we love Data.
Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits.
Once we create some form of artificial intelligence, these legal arguments are going to happen.
Do machines deserve rights? You know, probably.
In the history of many worlds, there have always been disposable creatures. They do the dirty work. An army of Datas hold generations of disposable people.
He's talking about slavery.
The term robot itself comes from the Czech play Rossum's Universal Robots, and the word robota means laborer. A pejorative version of it means slave. So our conception of what robots will be is directly umbilically connected to our idea of them as an underclass.
Why do you think your people made me?
We made you because we could. You are just a machine, an imitation of life.
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem.
Blade Runner is a slave narrative, basically. They've created these replicants to be our slaves. And I think that's the part that's really troubling about Blade Runner, is that not only is it sort of this technologically and environmentally ruined future, it's sort of a morally and ethically ruined future as well.
I wrote those first couple scripts thinking of a very small movie, and then Ridley said to me, "What's out the window?" And I said, "What's out the window?" "Well, the world." He said, "Exactly. What world is that? Where you make a robot indistinguishable from a human? Think about this for a second. Imagine," and he does that to you, you go, boom. I thought, oh God, he delivered a world. That's Ridley, he makes things. Ridley brought everything to it.
Blade Runner comes from a Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Philip K. Dick was very prolific and very profound, talking about the nature of reality and the nature of artificial intelligence and what it is to be human.
That was the nut of the idea, and it grew with Hampton into what it was.
Here was this beautiful, beautiful film, dark, noir-ish, and I thought, wow, a film can be so artistic. And the idea of these machines challenging us and their lack of affect, their lack of emotion.
The film's constantly saying there is no emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Computer that just makes decisions.
Right.
Negative or positive, it doesn't really care.
Yeah, with the Voight-Kampff test.
Correct.
Is this to be an empathy test? Capillary dilation of the so-called blush response?
We call it Voight-Kampff for short.
The Voight-Kampff is a series of questions that allowed the questioner to find out whether or not who was being questioned had feelings.
It's your birthday. Someone gives you a calfskin wallet.
I wouldn't accept it.
It's about empathy.
You're reading a magazine, you come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
Just answer the questions, please.
Not to get gooey about empathy, but it does seem that empathy is the big divide between us and everything else.
Deckard is very much a man in his job. He firmly believes that as long as robots are working properly, it's not his problem, but that if a replicant misbehaves, it is indeed his problem, and his duty to retire it. However, over the course of the film, he increasingly questions whether or not disobeying orders means that you're defective or that you are a human with rights and wills and dreams of your own.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
There's such poetry in the scene where Roy Batty's dying.
Yes.
It's just a magnificent scene.
He wrote that.
Really? Rutger wrote that?
It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to have the plug pulled.
Yeah.
Literally on everything at dawn.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's going to be the last night. And Rutger said, I have written something. And he said,
All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
I'm nearly in tears.
Yeah.
He said, what do you think? I said, let's do it. So we literally went out, we shot it within an hour.
Yeah.
And at the end, he looked at him and gave that most beautiful smile.
Time to die.
And he had a dove in his hand, he let
it go. Yeah. Is it saying Roy Batty had a soul? Roy Batty was a fully sentient being.
Yes.
4 of your films now have had an intelligent, embodied AI, right? An artificial intelligence, synthetic person. So where do you think we come out in this? Are we handing the keys to the kingdom off to the machines?
I don't think we should. With a creation of something so potentially wonderful and dangerous as AI. The inventor frequently is obsessed by the success of what he's doing, rather than looking at the real outcome. Here's where the problem is. There's a moment where it passes over your control.
Yeah.
That's where the danger lies. Then you cross over and you're in trouble. You get an AI, you have to have limitations.
You got to have your hand on the plug the entire time.
All the time. Totally.